The views and opinions expressed during Love and Life with Lana and Dave are those only of the speakers and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or the position of our podcast hosts or affiliates. Any content provided is not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, individual, anyone, or anything. All right, let's do it.
You're listening to Love and Life with Lana and Dave, the podcast where logic is power and you take control. Thank you for tuning in and making the choice to listen in and get ideas for your own love and life. Now, here are your hosts, Lana Williams and David Vaccaro.
Hey, how's it going? Happy August. Oof, it's August already. So we've been on and off here at the podcast over the summer. For several reasons, probably because both of us have different things going on. It's been a little crazy. And, we've been sort of taking a little bit of break, regrouping for the podcast. But I wanted to just do a quick podcast so you guys could have something to listen to over the summer, at least here and there. So I'm going to drop one today. So this will drop Thursday. And it should be August 3rd, beginning of August. So that's why I'm saying happy August, because I can't believe the summer's kind of going pretty quick. We just had a heat wave. That heat wave is pretty much done. So this is a really good week coming up here where we should have some low humidity and some decent temperatures. So that's really good. So anyway, I'm Lana of Lana and Dave. Today I want to talk about mindset. Just things that are going on in your life, and like not necessarily how bad they are or how good they are or what's happening, but really how you're picturing those things. Mindset, like point of view, perspective, and a little bit about brain wiring, because some of us have just different ways of looking at things, and it's because of the way that we're wired. So there's a social aspect of, or a construct, or there's something that most people think happens where they assume everybody else, I guess it's kind of a projection. So they assume everybody else sort of has the same point of view that they do. There's no way that you don't run into this. I'm sure everybody runs into this, where there's a person that they're dealing with that thinks that you are seeing things their way and is either completely taken back or, I don't know, hostile or defensive about anyone who doesn't see things the way they do. Of course, it's good as human beings for us to just to try to understand that there are people that are out there that look at things differently than we do. It's just really a good idea to try to see if we can put ourselves in the shoes of others in conversation and in discussions to make sure that we're understanding where they're coming from. It's a little easier to converse and to communicate with people who we're kind of trying to see things their way. It makes for conversation to be better. It's easier to relate, to connect with people in that way. And listen, I'm the worst person when it comes to that. I really do. I understand. Well, put it this way. I know that there are people out there that think differently than I do, because I probably am really anomaly in the sense that I don't really think about most things in general the way anyone does. So I'm like more the exception or the weirdo. I always call that myself an alien, a weirdo, in the sense that I don't see things the way other people do almost all of the time. So I have to sort of stop and compensate and understand, why or how people see things differently, or at least anticipate it in general conversation. So there have been times that I've found I have found my tribe, and there are times that I kind of sort of retreat to a safe place for me where everyone sort of thinks how I do, just because it's sometimes exhausting to be in a world where everybody seems to think differently than I do. But over the years, I've learned to adjust to that. It is frustrating sometimes, but I understand how it works. So we're going to talk about a few things. The concept of thinker versus feeler, which sounds a way more black and white, or way more I would say, absolute than it actually is. And then roll into the concept of asker versus guesser. And all of us are one or the other generally in how we deal with other people, with how we relate to others, with how they relate to us. And there's usually a breakdown in communication where you have a person who's an asker and a guesser having a conversation, just because the asker and the guesser both assume that the other person knows what they mean, assumes that the other person is going to take it without a problem. But when you have one or the other in the same room having a conversation, it can trigger and set off some minefield type things that are going on because of the way that somebody is interpreting what's being said. So we're going to get into that a little bit, and then expectation and how it can create disappointment. And if you're the type of person who has, I don't want to say high expectations of other people, but just an expectation of how you think something is supposed to play out, or you really want something to happen bad enough that you will convince yourself that it's definitely going to happen, and you kind of you talk yourself into something because you want it, and you kind of are a little blind to some of the realities that might get in the way of what you want. And when those things do happen and they blindside you, it can cause a lot of disappointment. Although, again, coming with brain wiring as far as like how people think about things, there are people who default to a situation where they want things to happen. They have wishful thinking. There's nothing really wrong with that, but to some degree you want to remain grounded, because if you wishful think all the time, you can be blindsided by a lot of reality, and that's not necessarily a good way to live. It's pretty stressful. So we'll discuss that a little bit. A little bit about dating and some of the breakdowns of dating and expectations and how we apply those things, and if there's any way to kind of counteract those, it would be easier. And then a little bit about the workplace and how you would maybe have a mindset in your workplace that might be more helpful to you depending on what it is that you do. Some people love their job, some people do not. But it's easier to have a good mindset to try to get through the day and to try to apply things to your life that might be helpful overall, you know. And then a couple of phrases that people have said that I've noticed over some time about how it gets interpreted. There are these phrases that socially people say and other people are supposed to pick up on, but because of the fact that everybody's wired differently brain-wise in how they interpret what's being said, some people will see it as a completely different thing than others. And so I'm gonna run a couple of those phrases by. And then, you know, some of the things that you hear in life, fake it till you make it and things like that, there is a way to program your brain. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. But starting at the beginning, let's begin with the thinker versus feeler, and how in the world, obviously, there are so many different people out there and there's such a spectrum of personalities, right? So I personally see everything that, instead of seeing it as a versus, as some people do, like you're either this or you're that, and there's no in between. I sort of see one type of person on this side, one type of person on the other side, and then a big spectrum in the middle of people that are percentages of those two things, right? So you may have somebody right in the middle that's exactly a makeup of the two things, depending on how much they contradict each other. But for the most part, you know, life is a spectrum. And so I'll start with, you know, a little bit of MBTI, which is Myers-Briggs. That typing of personalities, it comes out with something like 16 different types. But at the end of the day, those types are, each letter in the four letters of Myers-Briggs is a breakdown of a percentage of one to the other. So starting off with introvert and extrovert, there are people who are really severely introverted, people that are really severely extroverted. But there's a spectrum in the middle, and most of us hit that spectrum, so where we're not really completely 100% of one or the other. We're sort of maybe 49-51 or somewhere between, or somebody like 35-65 or somewhere in the middle where we're kind of leaning more one way or the other, but we're not necessarily completely and totally one thing. There are people who are extreme in both ways, but I think for the most part we fall in the middle, right? We have this bell curve. And with the other letters that fall in Myers-Briggs, it's the same thing. So there is a thinker or feeler sort of category there, right? So there are some people that are really highly analytical. I happen to be one of those people, so I kind of understand it. Sometimes I can be pragmatic. Sometimes I can be extremely literal about things, and I just don't pick up on nuance. And I think when I was younger, it's different because I was around a lot more of that. Now I'm sort of leaning towards a group of people that are a lot like myself, and so I'm starting to lose a lot of those. I'm getting rusty on a lot of those skills of like picking up social cues. I'm just not doing it as much as I used to. As I get older, I'm kind of not interested in doing it as much because it is not direct and honest to me, and it sort of drives me crazy. And so as much as I know sometimes that I need to do it and I need to brush up on those skills, I also kind of don't want to deal with it because I know the misinterpretation of stuff can be frustrating dealing with people in a social setting. But the thinker and feeler, there are things that people will do or say and mean completely something else, which I guess is fine if you're around a room of people that sort of will say this, but really there's an underlying meaning of this. That's great. But again, we're on a spectrum, so not all of us look at it that way. And so I would say the thinker versus feeler is adjacent to the ask and the guess. And the story is, and I brought this up in podcasts previously, right? There's going to be a little bit of everything that I've discussed in a podcast somewhere in this one. I'm just sort of collecting it all together, putting it under a category. But the asker versus guesser is something that if you go Google it right now, there's a complete syndrome or there's a complete description of ask versus guess, right? So some people are, I don't know if it's, well, I'm not going to say I don't know. I know for sure that it's related to your playbook. So that comes from your upbringing and how you were raised. You were just raised a certain way. And so there are a lot of habits, things that you learned from your elders growing up that I wouldn't say are the way to do things. However, most people will tell you, well, look at this is the way it should be. This is the way when you do this, you mean this. That's stuff that they grew up with in their household and around their family and even in their neighborhood. These were social norms and constructs that they learned growing up to these. So a lot of people believe that these things are concrete and will refer back to those things and the way that they deal with people outside of that circle. And if that doesn't match, they will usually point at the person outside the circle and say, well, you're doing this wrong. This is not the way you're doing. When I say this, I mean this, and you should know that, and you should mean the same thing I mean. And I get that. And I do it. I know a lot of people that do it, regardless of what kind of upbringing you had. This is just kind of the way you default without thinking about it. Geez, maybe somebody else was raised differently. Maybe when they say this, they mean this. And as you get older, it is kind of hard to think of it that way, but you kind of have to start thinking, okay, here's somebody who was raised in completely different. I mean, when you look at different cultures and religions and things like that, it's probably a little easier to apply that equation. Like, oh, this person grew up in this completely different culture, so everything that they say, their language, their body language, their dialect, the kind of food they eat, all kinds of stuff like that is different, but it's, I don't know how, somehow easier, I think, to apply to like regions for some reason and cultures than it is to say, hey, this person grew up across the street from me, but does not have the same childhood that I have. They didn't learn things the same way that I did. So when I can say this, and I know that for sure this is the way I feel, and this is what I mean when I say it, but I have to be conscious of the fact that somebody coming from a different household may not understand what I mean or may not apply the same meaning to what I'm saying that I do. So asking versus guessing is, mostly as far as society is concerned and as far as like the U.S. is concerned. And of course, there's all different types of, even within the U.S., dialects and childhoods, the way that people grow up and the way that they relate to each other. And so my story I've told earlier was like the asker versus guesser story, which someone I can't remember where I learned it. I think I listened to some podcasts, and I think I heard somebody tell the story in the asker versus guesser. They were explaining what this means. And an asker is somebody that is like, look, this is what I want. This is what I want to say. That they just completely come out directly and say whatever it is that they have to say. If they have a problem, they, especially when they're asking a question of another person, that's really kind of how it starts. But it also encompasses most of the way that they relate to other people. So they will be direct. They'll be straightforward. They'll be concise. They'll say what they have to say. And there's no sugarcoating about it. There's no tiptoeing around it. So I happen to be an asker, and there are people who are guessers, and those people are more erring on the side of trying to feel you out, trying to see if you will complete the sentence. Maybe they want something, but they don't want to come out and ask for it. They think it's rude. Again, this is some upbringing that they had, and it's common. It's definitely a lot of people that I know have this sort of upbringing where, they were taught that they had to be very polite. And if they beat around the bush enough times, the other person would pick up the hint and would take it from there. And so they want something, but they don't want to come out and say they want something. To them, there's some kind of rule or childhood structure that they had that tells them that that's not right when they do that they're being rude or they're imposing or whatever it is. So when you get an asker and a guesser in a room, obviously it's going to be very frustrating because there are people who are just going to come out and say what they have to say, and they're going to generally hit the sensibilities of people who are not looking to be direct. So you have somebody who, there's reactions to that where there are people that are in the guessing type mindset are going to be put off almost by somebody comes over and says, look, blah, 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 and drops it on the table. And look, I personally don't have like a real thin skin. So if somebody says something to me, to me, it's a blessing to just hear somebody say what they've got to say and be done with it. If it comes off a little harsh, it doesn't hurt my feelings. I'd much rather know the information. I really just want to know what I need to know. I don't care how I get the information, with the exception of you insulting me. I don't care how I get the information. I just want the bottom line. I want the bullet points. I want the data. That's me. And I am a relator in the sense that I will interact with people because I'm looking to either get information from you or give information to you. This is just me interacting in general. That's kind of the way that my brain is wired. Everything else is kind of sort of taking me off course to what it is that I need to know. And so I have to kind of allow for that sometimes, but I'm not going to lie. It is very frustrating to go to get all of the extra stuff that where I'm trying to just get to the bottom of a lot of whys coming from me. If you do anything around me, I'm going to know why. I want to know why you're doing it. Not because I think there's a problem with it, but just because I'm a curious person. And if I don't know the whys, I can't follow the process. It drives me crazy. Again, that's my problem. But anyway, so the story I heard was an asker and a guesser as a married couple are driving back home, or they're driving, they're on a road trip and they're coming back home from wherever they went. Husband and wife are in the car. They're driving long distance, couple of states, it's kind of getting late. Luggage is in the trunk, the whole thing. And at some point, the wife turns to the husband and says, "Are you thirsty?" And the husband says, "No, not really." "Okay, you don't want to stop and get anything to drink or eat? Do you need to hit the bathroom, anything like that?" "Nope, I'm fine," the husband says. So after a while, the husband starts to get an attitude from his wife and he doesn't understand what's happening. And at some point, they do stop. I forget what it is, for gas or whatever it is. And she gets something to drink. And he's like, "Oh, I didn't realize you were thirsty." And she's like, "Well, I asked you if you wanted to stop and get something to drink." And he said, "Well, I wasn't thirsty." So this is the asker-guesser dynamic where you have somebody who just doesn't want to say, "Hey, can you stop? I need something to drink." Or, "Oh, damn, the last time we stopped, I didn't grab some stuff and throw it in the cooler. Can we take a quick detour and I need something to drink, or I want something to eat, I'm hungry, whatever. Instead of asking him directly to do that, for some reason, again, it's a personality thing, and it comes from your childhood. She felt that it would be rude and an imposition to say, and this is her husband, but this is just how she is, where she can't really come out and say so she's hoping that if he's thirsty, she can get herself something to drink too, because it's going to be a way less confrontational approach for her to just say, hey, I'll ask him if he's thirsty. And he being the asker would not know otherwise, except that she's asking him if he's thirsty. And he maybe is even thinking that she's being considerate by asking. We have no idea. But it's very possible that he's thinking that, oh, how nice, like she's wondering if I'm thirsty. And that's the extent of what he thought. And he said, no, I'm not, because he wasn't. And that was the end of it. Meanwhile, she's trying to sort of hint and needle and do things that are trying to she's trying to get him to go into that direction. And again, I can tell you as an asker, that's frustrating. Sometimes we do know what's going on, and it depends on our mood. I'm going to be honest with you, where we decide that we're going to pick up the hint and we're in the mood to do that. But sometimes we really just don't have any clue. We don't have any clue because it's so indirect that we can't detect it. And in this sense, it's kind of like, wow, you're sitting there, you're thirsty, you want something to drink. We're on the road and I can pull over in 2 seconds and get something to drink. And it's not even a problem for me. But you haven't told me that. For some reason, you think that you can't tell me, hey, I need something to drink. I just, that's weird. So there's all kinds of weird things that go on in there. It's possible that in her childhood, she was living with a family that thought it was an absolutely horrible thing to ask for things or to impose on somebody to do something that's out of the way of what they're doing. You don't know. But at the end of the day, especially if you're married with somebody for a long time, that's very frustrating. Why wouldn't this woman just say, hey, can you stop, real quick? And I'm thirsty enough that I want you to stop before we hit another gas station. And I just want to grab a bottle of water or whatever. So, in your life, with the asking versus the guessing, this is the mindset that I'm trying to discuss, in the sense that, what type of mindset do you have? Do you think that it's easier to just be direct? And there's really no right answer for this, actually. If you're in a room full of guessers and you're a guesser, everybody's happy. It's a party and everybody's great. Nobody misunderstands anything. Unfortunately, it's almost impossible to get a complete room full of people. Even within your own family, there's always a couple of people that don't fit in that category. And so there's usually some kind of friction, because at some point somebody doesn't understand the other person, or somebody's frustrated with the way the other person is trying to get things done. So it's so hard it's so hard to get into a room with a bunch of people like yourself in a situation like that. You're going to have to improvise at some point, or understand at some point that not everybody is that way. And that, to me, is a different mindset. And the mindset that comes from your childhood can shape a lot of the ways that you interact with people, even years and years and years after you've left your home as a kid and you're a full-grown adult at 40, 50 years old. You still have a lot of that underlying, and unless you work on it consciously, it'll always be that way. It's sort of a default, and it's sort of something that is ingrained in you unless you actively throw in to your mindset the equation of what you're doing, a couple of different ways to do it, and then you have to kind of practice at it. So your brain will do that. Just like building habits and forming habits, your brain will be able to do that and adjust, and you just have to be in the situation enough to train your brain to kind of think differently about stuff like that. But it's just to bring that to your awareness that asker versus guesser, that's kind of I would say for the most part, that's the spectrum that most of us are on one side or another. Some people are really, really blunt askers. Some people are direct, but not that direct. And some people are in the middle. It depends on what kind of day they're having. And then you get on the other side where people are very, very, very sensitive to confrontation or asking for things, or they just feel like they're putting people out. And then at the end, you get that really, 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 extreme group of people pleasers that don't actually, they're selfless and they don't want to do anything for themselves. And it's almost an act of Congress for you to actually understand that they need a thing because they will never tell you. So again, those are a couple different ways to look at it. But the phrase that every so often, I'll kind of go up on social media and I'll throw the question, when you hear the question, what are you doing? And I think asking versus guessing is real prevalent in the way that most people see that question. Some people see that question as, oh, here's a person that wants to know if I'm busy. I mean, it's not in any way in that question. There's no indication in that question that somebody's asking you if you're busy for whatever reason. Some people think it means, oh, this is a person that's trying to get me to do something. They have a task that they want to hand to me, or they're going to ask me if I can help them with something. There's some kind of thing they need from me. Then other people are like, oh, this is somebody who wants to know if I want to hang out. They want to know if I have free time. So again, that's a question that's sort of like, it's all, if I want a litmus test for how people are, whether they're askers or guessers, if I ask that question and I just tell them, look, give me the first thing that comes to your mind when you see that question, there are people that will give me a myriad of answers, and they're pretty sure. They're damn sure that the way that they're seeing it is the right way. That's the way that it's supposed to be taken when somebody asks you that question. And I think that to me, that is kind of a litmus test of what kind of childhood you had, what kind of mindset you have as far as you're interacting with other people, and what you want, and trying to get what you want in the course of like a social environment. You want something to drink, you want somebody to tell you something, whatever it is. That's how you go about it, is basically how you would answer that question when somebody asks you, what are you doing? How you would interpret that question is basically going to tell you who you are. So there are people who will ask, when they're asked, what are they doing? They will literally tell you what they're doing because that's the question that you were asked, and it's weird because my brain is wired in such a way that if you say to me after a weekend on a Monday at work, hey, how was your weekend? Was it good? My answer is going to be yes or no or yeah, it was okay. That's what I'm going to answer because that's what you asked me. I'm not going to tell you what I did on my weekend because that's not what you asked me. You asked me if it was good or not. And that's going to be it. Now, if you go on from there, it doesn't mean that I don't want to tell you. It just means that I just answer the question as it's asked. Pretty pragmatist, pretty literal. And if you say, well, what did you do? Then I'll tell you what I did. But I'm not going to tell you what I did when you ask me how it was. That's a completely different question. So that's just the way my brain is wired. Now, sometimes I have to stop. It sounds really crazy because it's natural for some people. I have to stop and think about that. What is this person really asking me? And let me look at the environment we're in and what is everybody else doing? If I'm around a bunch of other people and they start sharing what they did, I'm going to be like, oh, light bulb. This is really more about what I did, not necessarily what the status of it was. Is it good? Is it bad? Indifferent? If you ask me, I've more than once been asked in a relationship, what are we doing? And I've never had any clue that they were asking me what the state of the relationship was. It was more, I thought they were asking me what we were doing that day. Or, it would always be like, oh, these are the plans we made. Aren't these the plans we made? And it would be like, no, what are we? And I've actually had people getting upset with me because they thought that I would understand that and I was avoiding the question, and it wasn't. It was a matter of, it was a very vague question. It didn't address any specific thing. And if you ask me something vague enough, I'll come back and ask you what you mean by that. And I'm never doing it to avoid the question. But my mind will actually race trying to figure out what it is that you're trying to get from me because it's not specific enough. And so I've had that problem too, where I've had people think that I was evading a question, and it's like, no, I'm not really trying to evade the question. I didn't understand the question. Like, you asked me a question, but like, I don't know what it is you're talking about. It's completely out of the blue to me. Whereas other people pick up social cues and somehow or other understand what that question means. It completely goes over my head. So anyway, that's just, more fun in my life for me to be who I am. I have to kind of read the room sometimes and look around and stop for a minute and say, okay, well, what's happening here? And then, here's what the context is, because I lose the context. If you ask me something, my mind freezes, and I try to search for the answer that I think you are looking for. And sometimes, depending how you word it, I won't know what you're trying to ask me. And when I ask for clarification, a lot of people, some people are okay with it. It depends. People that are my type, where they have my personality, they get the fact that I'm lost. They're like, oh, okay, well, sorry, here's what I really meant to ask or whatever. And we go on from there. But there are people who are guessers, and those people tend to be put off, and they don't want people to think that they're being rude. And they I think, feel like other people are bothered by them somehow. And so when we ask a question like, what do you mean by that? They don't take it like we're asking for information. They take it like we're offended by the question, or we're trying not to talk to them, or we don't want them to know something. And that's actually not happening in a lot of cases. So that's what I'm saying about your mindset. Make sure that you can understand, here's how I think. And I tend to be self-conscious, and I tend to be try to apply those things to like a blank page, in the sense that when somebody is talking to you and you lean towards, I feel this way or I feel that way about it, those are our own insecurities being mirrored towards what it is that we're doing and reflecting on the other person we're talking to. And a lot of times none of that is happening to the other person at all. They don't have any idea of any of that. But in our head, there's a whole circus of things that are going on in our head as we're talking, and we think they know. We think we're certain that they know what we're thinking, and people just really don't. So moving on, the next thing I wanted to talk about was looking at the phrase. I'll use the phrase "nobody cares." I know that's been posted a lot on social media. I think there's a meme about this. And there's another one that is using the phrase "nothing matters," but I don't necessarily like that one so much. I think that's a little bit tougher to use to interpret the difference in mindset. So if you say nobody cares, that can be taken one of two ways. Now, there are some people that will take that as a depressing, negative statement. And it's in relation to, and again, I think this is a litmus test between thinkers and feelers, or between askers and guessers, in how that they take that statement. And I think guessers and feelers are a little more apt to take that statement personally, like nobody cares about you, like in a negative sense. Whereas I think thinkers and askers are going to see that as freedom of, oh, nobody cares. Like I can do whatever I want. Nobody cares. Like most of us are looking ahead under the radar. And so to us, it's interpreted as, oh, good. Nobody's paying attention. Nobody's going to judge me for anything. I can just do what I got to do. And like, nobody cares. To us, that's a great sense of invisibility, which most of us love. There are people who really don't want to be invisible. And their mindset is like, I need to be seen. I need to be people to know that I'm in the room. When you walk into a room, again, myself and my tribe, when we walk into a room, most of us are trying to walk in inconspicuously. We don't want to interact. We don't want to be seen. Most of the time, we don't want to alert the room to the fact that we're there, unless that's what we feel like doing. We want the option to do that, which is very different than somebody who wants to walk into the room and have everybody be happy that they're there and notice who they are and know their name and that kind of thing. Both of those things are fine, but it's going to be really hard for somebody from one end to understand somebody on the other. I'll come from the side of, I don't understand attention seeking. I don't understand why people want attention, why people are upset when they don't get attention, why people find anonymity or inconspicuousness to be like a downer. There are people who are very, very hooked into their identity and very interested in making sure that they're known and people know who they are and their names are spelled correctly, things like that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I come from the opposite side of like where this is all foreign to me and I don't understand any of it. Like, I don't like using my name. I don't like when people call me by my name. Like, I don't think my name is necessary in conversation. I mean, if you're talking to me, I know who you are. You know who I am. We're having a conversation. If we're dating, like, our personal names aren't necessarily used in everyday conversation. If it's just the two of us, there's no need to address each other by name. And I think only unless you're somewhere where you're in a room full of people and somebody's trying to get your attention and they call your name, that makes sense. To me, that it's practical and it makes sense. Or somebody says to a person you're dating or a person you're friends with, hey, what's her name? Okay, well, then they ask for your name. Of course, I would want to know why they would want to do that, but I guess I get that that's part of the social aspect of things. But for the most part, somebody using your name as they talk to you is like not necessarily going to happen. It's not really a common thing, like in a one-on-one conversation or in a room full of people, unless, like I said, there's a group of people talking. Somebody needs to point out something to somebody else, or, you know, you need to actually use a name so that the person you're talking to knows you're talking to them, or, you know, they're at a great distance where you have to yell their name out to get them to turn around because they can't hear you at a reasonable level. Things like that. Or you're addressing a letter, you're sending them a card. These type of things, to me, you're asking for them if you call their job, or you're asking for them if you call somewhere. Other than that, for the most part, your name is not like, it's nice, but it's not an everyday thing. It just isn't necessary to have a conversation with somebody one-on-one and like be using their name. If somebody does that with me and I'm the only one there, I'm going to find it odd, as a matter of fact. And if I'm having a conversation with somebody, text message or Messenger or something like that, and they use my name constantly in text, it will make me uncomfortable, and I'll tell them to cut that out. I mean, there's no need for them to keep calling me by name because I already know who I am and they know who they're talking to. But anyway, again, there are people who are more concerned with, do I matter? Are people interested in knowing about me? Are people learning about me? Do people remember things about me? Like I said, this is all foreign to me, but I know that there are people who really, they thrive on this. This is something that makes sense to them. In a spectrum, there's so many people in the middle between I really want to be seen and noticed, and again, you know, for me, I came along and to see social media come along, from the beginning, and the involvement of social media and selfies and influencers and that kind of thing, where there are people that just they're thriving off of who they are, who's paying attention to them, who likes what they say, who cares about what they say, who repeats what they say, what goes viral, what doesn't. All of this for me as a Gen Xer is completely, I'm used to it now. I mean, as far as it being part of the world, but it's still baffling to me when I watch it. It's just, I sit there and I just kind of go, this is so weird, because it's not my thing. And a lot of us Gen Xers just didn't have that growing up, so it would be foreign to most of us. But those who are very, very interested in their identity and making sure they're known and seen and remembered, those people adjusted to that and got interested in that quickly and picked up that kind of thing quickly. So, of course, I have Gen Xers that I'm friends with, or that I came up with, I grew up with, that was extremely exciting for them to get into, because that was something that it's a tool for them to do whatever it is that they've already done. So, again, not all Gen Xers most of us are, I would say that our generation is the generation that kind of was raised as we were, kids that took care of ourselves. We were by ourselves a lot. Some of us were fine with it. Some of us were not. At the end of the day, most of us are aware of how to do that because it's something that we grew up doing. It's just a default because that's a childhood that we had. But of course, there's personalities on top of the fact that you were raised a certain way. And some people, of course, didn't like that. So, those were maybe the girls that were on the phone all the time, or that wanted to be more social, wanted to go to the mall, things like that, and be around other kids. and be known and seen and liked, and had, they wanted the reputation. They wanted people to understand who they were. They wanted to be popular, all that kind of stuff. That's really the same thing. It's in a different package nowadays, right? So anyway, the mindset part of it for me is that expectation of the guessing versus the asking is where we're at now, and then rolling into the next thing. You have to understand that there's so many different types of people that, like, you have to kind of, as you get older, you kind of allow for that. Okay, well, I like to do things this way, but okay, I'm gonna run into people that act like this and do things this way. So I can't be taken back by that. I can't be offended by that. I can't be frustrated. I can't be aggravated by that. I have to kind of adjust. But rolling into social life and expectations as a person, that if you throw all of your wishful thinking and you throw all of your hopes and dreams into everything you do, you will find yourself frustrated a lot. And so it's possible to get the mindset into knowing that not everything is personal, knowing that not everything is about you, not everybody's doing anything to do anything negative to you, and bringing it back to that phrase of nobody cares. How you take that phrase is going to be based on how personal you take things, how much, you think, I don't know how else to say this, things are about you. Sometimes things are just not about you. Now, I come from the upbringing, however it went, my childhood and my life or whatever, but for me, everything is not about me. And so the first thing I think about almost everything I see is that, like, it's related to some other thing. I never even look at myself as a center of a lot of stuff that's going on. Sometimes I'm the center of something and somebody's upset with me or doesn't like me or is addressing me in some way, and I don't even get it. It takes me a while to catch on to that, because as a kid, I was told, hey, you're no big deal, blah, blah, blah. We came from that kind of humble, whatever, that kind of family, dynamic, although there were several people in my family that were not for anything but modest and humble. But anyway, that was what was preached to us, that we came from the seen and not heard generation. So for us as Gen X kids, our parents were more, I want to say more they were the silent generation, in the sense that I wasn't really raised by hippies. Hippies was like a generation after my parents. So we were the kids that we picked up. It's hard to explain with the generations and the way that they go. But my grandmother and grandfather, my aunt and uncle, my aunt and my mother, well, my uncle too, but my aunt and my mother were raised to be seen and not heard. That was what they were raised as children. That was their whatever. They weren't supposed to get involved in adult conversations. They weren't supposed to make a lot of noise, complain, do this, do that. They were supposed to just kind of, do whatever it is that they were told to do and shut up about it. And parents didn't want to hear children unless they asked them a question. That was basically it. Do not speak unless you're spoken to. That's how my mother and my aunt were raised. So it's only natural that they would turn around and raise us to do the same. Now, obviously, our generation is different in the sense that our parents were off working and we were all kind of home by ourselves. We're watching a lot of TV, cooking ourselves dinner, or, whatever, doing the housework in the house, cooking dinner till our parents got home from work, that kind of thing. We had keys to the house. We left in the morning. We came back, whatever, we took off on a Saturday. We came back 8 hours later. We weren't home all day. When our parents were home, they didn't want us in the house, that kind of thing. But being raised a certain way is generally going to be, it's a kind of a holdover or a rollover from your parents, unless they're really, really conscious of how they were raised and what kind of damage it's doing, and they decide that they want to break the chain, which some parents have done. But a lot of times it's just like this unconscious passing down of behaviors. And so I never, we never were raised, we were raised that, hey, you're not a big deal. You're this, you're that, you're not, whatever. So I almost look at everything as not having something to do with me as a default. And that doesn't mean that I think that I'm innocent or that I'm completely, that I'm not to blame for anything. It's just that I never look at anything in an egocentric fashion. I just don't. So if somebody does something, I could take it personally and say, well, maybe they're doing something because of something I did. It never occurs to me to think that way. My thinking is more, oh, hey, people have lives. People have stuff going on. I know for sure when I do something, it's nothing to do with anybody around me or anybody that I'm upset with. It's generally some dumb thing that distracted me. If I don't call somebody back, that's a friend of mine. It's not because I'm upset with them. It's generally because I got sidetracked by some other thing and I didn't get a chance to call back. So the way that I look at it is when somebody doesn't call me, first of all, I have to be in the mindset to remember they were supposed to call me, which is a whole nother thing. But if they do call me, or if they're supposed to call me and don't, with the exception of it being related to like a time sensitive event, like if we're supposed to be going somewhere or something's going on and the phone calls hinging on whether or not we're going to do a thing, that's different because that's something I need information on. So I'm going to be a little more interested in them calling me. I'm a little more pissed off if I don't hear from them if it's some information that I need. But if it's just like, hey, how you doing, blah blah blah, you're talking to somebody for a while and then they say, oh, I gotta run, I got something going on, let me call you right back. A lot of my friends do that. I don't hold them to that. That was part 1 of Mindset. Stay tuned for next week. We'll have part 2 for you. Have a great week. Bye-bye. Hey, you just listened to Love and Life with Lana and Dave. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please share the podcast, leave us a comment or review, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any new content. We'll see you soon.